Afternoon, everyone. Hi, I hope you've had a really good day so far, those of you in the room, but also those of you joining us online. Welcome to our session on induction. I'm Tista Chakravarty-Gannon, and I have with me two of our clinical fellows, Kit and Kiara, and we'll be talking through building a better start with you today. First of all, before we get started, I'm just putting up a slide, which hopefully you can see clearly online as well as in the room, because we're going to be using Mentimeter today. So can I ask you to just go on to menti.com, like it says on the slide there, and enter that code, and all things being equal, magically, you will be able to vote on the few voting questions we have. Don't worry, however, if you've got any technical difficulties, the whole session is not predicated on voting. We'll manage. So I'll give you a few moments, and the screen that you get, just pop a heart on there. I can see a few people are there now. So we'll just give that a few more moments. Okay, lovely. And for the voting slides, I have left the code on those as well, so you'll be able to go on if needed a bit later. So the aims of this session this afternoon are to explore the challenges and the opportunities around induction more broadly. And what we really want to do, however, is have a discussion with you to consider how we can collaborate together to improve induction. So that's what we really want to do, and there will be breakout in the room and breakout online to enable us to do that. But first, by way of brief introduction, so as I say, I'm Tista. I've been in and around healthcare for 25 years now. Before joining the GMC, I used to work with survivors of abuse in the SARCs, the Sexual Assault Referral Centres. I still do that, but it tends to be 1 day a week. But then about 11 years ago, a colleague and I at GMC were asked to set up, broadly, a support service for doctors on the ground. And that service is now known as GMC Outreach. Okay. I'll pause for a moment and let you digest those bullet points, so I'm not just reading them at you. So, as it says there, the outreach team, yes, we go out and provide that supportive consultancy. We provide that supportive teaching around areas of GMC standards and guidance. But that final bullet, I really want to pull that out, because a really key element of the role is listening and hearing what is happening on the ground. And that can help us affect cultural change. That might be locally. So someone might tell me that they are a foundation year doctor and they, at the weekend, had 47 outliers in trauma and orthopedics, and they need support in raising that. Or it might be people saying to us, we're really struggling with induction. The induction that we have for our IMG colleagues is not as supportive as it could be. My induction as a locum was not supportive, and I need more. So without further ado, I am going to hand you over with that segue to Kit and Kiara, who are going to talk through their experiences.
Thanks, Tista. So just to briefly introduce ourselves again, I'm Kirthni. By background, I'm a radiology trainee in London, and this year I'm on the National Medical Director's Clinical Fellow Scheme, splitting my time between the GMC and FMLM.
And I'm Kiara Katra. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and also one of the clinical fellows at the GMC working in fitness to practice.
So we thought, thinking about promoting inclusive and positive workplace cultures through good inductions, we thought we'd start by highlighting some of the challenges that certain groups of doctors face, and using that as a way to explore what a good induction might look like. So to that end, Kiara and I are going to talk about trainee and locum experiences, where we can hopefully draw on some of our own personal experiences. And then Tista will go on to speak about international medical graduates and some of the challenges that they face, as well as the work that the GMC is doing around this area. So what are some of the challenges that trainees and locums face? Of course, they are unique groups with their own individual challenges, but from our research and from our own personal experience, we found that there are a lot of overlapping and recurring issues that come up time and again. One, for example, is the fact that trainees and locum doctors do tend to move around quite regularly, be that between departments or between geographical locations. Another thing is that they can often be quite affected by hierarchies within the NHS and power dynamics that don't often play to their advantage. And of course, within these broad groups of trainees and locum doctors, these are a group of highly varied individuals that need catering to. Thinking specifically about trainee experiences, where we can probably relate them most, we have added pressures like exam pressures and training requirements in ARCPs. Our work patterns can often be quite inflexible, with inflexible rotas and leave, for example, that might not have time built in for a full induction process. And of course, there are lots of differences between specialties, especially if you're rotating between departments, despite quite a high perceived role homogeneity. Locums, in turn, have their own challenges.
Very much so. And I think we can both speak to experience of having locumed in various sites. Locum doctors often have the challenge of even perhaps being more disparate than trainees. They are often working short rota patterns, chaotic rotas, rather than perhaps overwhelming ones. And it's that sense of chaos that perhaps colours the locum experience and feeds into why an induction might be both more challenging to provide and yet more vital. So, how should it look? Now, we did a little bit of digging and found that there's very little that's actually said about what an induction ought to be outside of the basic requirements of health and safety and infection control. But in terms of the actual induction of how to do this job in this context. So you have highly skilled, trained professionals who have never been in this department, this ward. Where's the X-ray form? It's a very different kind of induction that's needed. So in terms of locums, the main thing that we found was NHS England. Writing, a healthcare provider is responsible for providing a suitable induction to enable them to carry out the work they are being engaged to do. And then there was further text that specified appropriate IT systems and access, buildings and departmental access, and then understanding the process for escalating any concerns. Now, suitable induction perhaps has its own grey space that could be valuable to discuss here today. And then for trainees, there was even less, actually. So each region, each trust often had a document outlining an induction for their trainees. But in terms of a general overview of what induction should be nationally across all trusts, very little was available. So the GMC specifies a requirement to take part in the induction that's offered by an employer when you join the organisation or move into a new role. So just that you have to do what the trust offers. And then the BMA, that time and facilities should be provided for all trainees at the start of a post to receive adequate induction into their workplace. Again, the idea of adequate, suitable, there's a lot of greys in that.
So we've discussed some of the challenges that trainee and locum doctors face, and we've heard what, if any, guidance is out there telling us what an induction should look like. What we've highlighted on this slide is what it often looks like in reality. And again, this is taken from research, but a lot of it resonated with our own personal experiences. Inductions can be very ad hoc and variable, both in the time that's allocated to it and in the content. And it was reported that often even basic things like introductions with the rest of the team, which are so important for team working within the multidisciplinary team, are often absent. And of course, that can hinder clinical practice. The other thing that really stood out was, especially with locum doctors, there can often be an expectation just to pick up and run and know what you're doing as soon as you enter the workplace. And they're often seen as filling the rota gaps in service provision. And a good induction process can be overlooked for these groups of doctors. And they can often also be treated very differently to doctors who are working kind of on a more permanent basis or trainees within the department. And it was reported that often they can be excluded from local developmental processes as well. Interestingly, the research that we looked at also showed that although there is kind of quite a often a perception that locum doctors, for some reason, are less safe than other doctors within a department. Actually, any factors that might be plausibly causing any differences in outcomes between locum doctors and other doctors are probably due to the way that a trust is deploying that locum doctor, rather than due to any intrinsic factor that that doctor possesses themselves.
So what's the result of all this? There's arguably a lack of knowledge and skills because there's an unfamiliarity with local structures, with guidelines, particularly employment nuances within a trust or a department. I mean, I certainly have had an experience of not being paid for a few months and the HR hiccups. It's fairly familiar to most doctors, and I'm seeing a few nods in the room. Then a lack of senior support or mentoring because you don't know who to go to. You don't know the structures and you don't know the contexts, no introductions. And then an assumption that no further induction is needed once you're in the post. So if you've already locumed somewhere, or you spent a week there, or you perhaps as an F1, which is where we saw most of the evidence of this, well, you've done your first 4-month job and you're rotating into a new department and a new specialty, but you don't need another induction, do you? And that really leads to, I suppose, many things, but that sense of embarrassment and anxiety of, God, I'm meant to be good at this job, but I don't know what I'm doing because I don't know what I'm meant to do in this space. It leads to then the perception of others that you're incompetent or unprofessional, and you don't know how to navigate that hierarchy or navigate that system. And you end up feeling a bit undervalued because of that anxiety, not knowing where to turn. You're someone that fills the rota. You're the rota gap. And in turn, that leads to the organization being more inefficient because finding that X-ray form takes you an extra 2 hours because you don't know where to go. And frankly, worse patient outcomes because that patient is going to have an X-ray 4 hours later down the line.
So you've heard us talk about the problems that trainees and locum doctors might face and the consequences that might occur as a result. Now we really want your views. So we've got 10 minutes, approximately 10 minutes for a discussion. So what are the solutions and what do you think a good induction might look like and might include? So do discuss amongst yourself. For those in the room and those online will be put into breakout rooms. Please do discuss. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So whilst you're discussing, please put them into the Menti so that we can share it with the wider group.
Mm-hmm. And I know there are a few circular tables handily put, so you may want to rejig into little groups or onto these tables if you feel that camaraderie of joining a table. But yes, please do put things into the Menti because it means we really can see what everyone's thinking.
Right. I need to remember the new time, so we're 10 minutes, aren't we? So we're 55.
Yeah.
14:55. Okay, fab. Right. Okay, if you can wrap up your conversations. We've heard lots of interesting things around the room, and I've had a look at the questions now coming in through the chat as well, and some really, really good ideas and resources being shared there. So thank you for our online joiners throwing things in as well. But yes, yeah.
So I think, as Tista mentioned, there have been some amazing conversations. I think there was some reflections on different approaches, that there's something about compassion and kindness and a sense of welcome, and then something about the practicalities of, I need to know where the loo is. and where can I get lunch, and balancing those things. And then there were some higher level discussions as well that were quite striking about the different levels of, well, I suppose the different leverages in a system, that actually is this from individuals on the ground showing someone where to get lunch, or is this a system factor where actually that needs to be part of an induction and a comprehensive one? Who takes ownership of that? Who has agency within that to be able to develop some of those ideas? And fundamentally, I love someone who's put up here, who sorts the problem? Which I think sums up quite a lot of the discussions that I overheard. Perhaps Kit and Tista have more to add from what you guys heard.
I think very similar reflections to you, Chiara. I think we all agree that induction is very important, especially for patient safety and workplace culture. But the question of how to standardise induction and how to make sure that an induction is good is really difficult, and that's come out in these discussions. Whose responsibility is it? But I think hopefully through having these conversations, we raise awareness, and if all of you walk away from here thinking, maybe I could do something about induction, then that's a win in itself. So really encouraging to hear all these thoughts.
And I'm going to take now a slightly different tack and come in immediately with another question. So we've thought about trainees, we've thought about locums, but now we've thought about what good looks like. What challenges do you think our internationally qualified colleagues tell us about? So again, if you just go on to Menti and just throw in your thoughts, what challenges do we hear most from our international colleagues about induction? So we've got culture shock, behaviour, revalidation might be wildly different. Lack of welcome. Inclusion, the formal induction is unhelpful. And the very fundamental of working and living in wildly different environment to that which you're used to. Bank accounts, outsiderism. Absolutely. The NHS system. And no induction as well. So I'm just going to share a list with you now. What do you think this list represents? It's a real list. And a couple of people are saying Statman training, things like that, but this is a real list. My friend who qualified in Sudan a number of years ago came here 2016-ish, and this was the gamut of her induction. That was it. E-learning on these areas and a couple of classrooms, and that was it. And then it was like, yes, you're safe to go on the wards now, aren't you? Off you go. That was it. Where is the welcome and thank you for coming here? Thank you for bringing your skills, your compassion to the NHS. Where was the NHS is a bit complicated, isn't it? This is how it works, or at least a bit of a primer, because 25 years in, I still struggle at times. Where's the, networks, mentorship? Where's the culture shock? Where's the support? And as I say, this was 2016, but these are the stories that we continually hear. And I'm sharing some quotes with you from focus groups that we've held with international colleagues. And again, I'll pause and just let you digest those. And again, these are recent focus groups. And that penultimate bullet, all of these are poignant, they're sad. But that penultimate bullet, that was a colleague who, in his country of qualification, there's one type of catheter. comes here, and of course we've got, well, 3. We've got female and male. He's working on a male ward, and you can see what happened here. He's instructed to get the catheter from the cupboard. Despite it being a male ward, female and male catheters, he picks the female one. And that catastrophe for the patients, that catastrophe for him, was eminently avoidable. Because again, he had no induction. And there are plenty of data, there are plenty of research around this. This is a more recent piece. And it speaks to many of the things that you typed into Menti. Okay. And I won't labour this, I won't rehearse it too much, but you know, it resonates with what you were saying. We know this. We know about the challenges. There is enough research on this. We don't need more research on this. What we need is action. Okay. There is support available. Okay. In UK practice, for years, we have had organisations, professional membership organisations, MDOs, colleges, of course. More recently, one that I will draw your attention to specifically, the Head Start project. This was set up by 2 young IMG colleagues who are absolutely marvellous. And they got here and thought, induction? Is there an induction? Is anyone going to help us? And then they set up the Head Start project as a series of webinars to focus on the things that they really would have benefited from when they started UK practice. It is marvellous, and I think they're brilliant. But what an indictment, you know, on a system that didn't support them as it could have done. There's support from the NHS, of course there is. There's support from us. There are resources out there. But that, as I say, that welcome, that local support, the detail around culture shock, things like that, exist in pockets, perhaps. And I remember it was 2011 that we called for a national induction. And at the time, it wasn't clear where the ownership was around that, so we created our own Welcome to UK Practice. Some of you may be familiar with it. And this is necessarily, because it's something that we devised, necessarily focuses on areas of GMC ethical guidance. I'll give you a bit more detail. It's a half-day workshop. It's free. And it does look at culture shock, it does look at communication, but then it delves into things like the differences around shared decision-making, around Gillett competency, things like that, things that are really different here in terms of the legal and ethical framework. It's a half-day workshop. Does it work? So have a look at that. The top half, those data are from what I call happy forms, you know, the tick box evaluation forms that people fill in. That's still really good for what I call happy forms. But the final couple of bullets there, that is academically robust evaluation that Newcastle did for us a few years ago. And unusually, for a standalone one-off medical educational intervention, it shows change of practice at time 2, follow-up. So it works. Even that half day makes a difference. Okay. But we recognise that it is only part of the jigsaw. And we are working with partners across 4 countries. I'm going to focus on work that I'm doing with NHS England and Improvement and the RES team in a moment, where we are looking at a wider, broader induction. Now, there are barriers. Of course there are barriers, and some of them you've thrown into the chat, you were talking about as we were wandering around the room and speaking with you. So that the ownership question as well that came up, that's one of the major barriers. Another barrier is the money. Where's the funding going to come from? And forgive me, this may be a little bit pointy, but I think some of it may be habit. We've done this in this way, or not done this in this way for so long. And what needs to change? So there are barriers, and again, there is research around this, so I won't labour it too much because I want to focus on what we can do positively and tell you a bit more about the standardised induction that we were working with NHS England Improvement on and their MRES team. Now, some of you will be aware of Prof. Marla Rao. So Marla and I and a number of colleagues across the system have co-produced a standardised induction that is a genuine welcome. Okay. So it provides for that welcome and thank you. It provides for that local orientation, the support around at least signposting around bank accounts, accommodation, schooling, what the area is like. It provides for mentorship, supervisors. Now, the way that it's written is rather like guidance because, as we've said, there are pockets of really good practice, superlative practice, and some of the messages that have come in speak to those as well. So we don't want to, there's no point in getting rid of something that is working in one area. So this is a high-level standardised induction that draws on what we know from the research to say, okay, do you provide something that explains the NHS? Do you provide something around communication if that is needed for your colleague that you've just recruited? Does it provide for X, Y, Z? So that's what the standardised induction is. And we are very hopeful that it will roll out this summer. There's a key meeting about it next month, and we're hopeful it will roll out. So watch this space. I talk about it often. Marla talks about it often on Twitter and in real life as well. So watch this space for that. And then final couple of thoughts. So we've talked about what induction should look like. We've talked about barriers. We've talked about those challenges people experience. How could you, in your role, work with us, and what do you need from us to help embed a good induction? I'll give you a moment to just throw in some thoughts. Yeah. Asking and listening. Yeah. The experience people have when they go into a new workplace. Being open and friendly makes such a difference. Sharing good practice, because as we say, there is plenty of good practice about. We need to spread that. Yeah, I like that turn of phrase, a recipe for cultural induction, yeah. Yeah, prayer, religious information. Time mandated. Yeah. A framework for mapping this. That local knowledge. Yes, welcome to UK practice mandated. As part of that. The standardised induction will do all of this that you are putting in if it is rolled out. So, yeah, so we are really hopeful it will be. Okay, well, thank you very much. We've got a few moments for questions, and I'm going to share, the resources will be shared with you, and one resource that I urge you to have a look at when you have a spare 8 minutes or so is our Things I Wish I'd Known video, where international colleagues and a colleague who returned to practice relatively recently share their thoughts. And, you know, they hit hard, and there's lots of positivity in there, but there's lots that just really makes you think. So I urge you to watch that. But other than that, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was useful. And, yeah, if there are any questions in the room, we can take a couple, and we'll wrap up. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you. I can't see any hands up. So
There are a few questions here.
There are a couple of questions.
So maybe if we just pick some of these. So what the role of shadowing for trainees in advance of starting an induction, what should be covered in shadowing that doesn't need to be an induction and vice versa? So I think if I speak from my limited experience here, I think shadowing was the most valuable part of any induction I've ever had, in large part because that's when you found out where the loo was. You know, and some of the other inductions were how to pick up a box. And, you know, I think at times it feels quite frustrating as someone on the ground who has some understanding and has some skill to then actually, you just need to know how to apply it. But I think, and I'm speaking as a non-IMG here, and I'm conscious of that, I think that might, to some degree, be flipped or balanced for an IMG, where some of the practicalities of an induction, where it's not just picking up a box, but the rota coordinator and where to raise a concern, I think that then maybe needs balance. But the shadowing element, I think we can't understate how vital that is.
Yeah, completely agree, Chiara. I think shadowing is part of induction. It's not a separate, it should be a part of induction. It's not a separate thing. And actually, we didn't have time to go into it in that much detail, but a lot of the research we looked at, looking at trainee and locum inductions, people wanted shadowing. That was one of the most important things that they said helped them.
And there's another question on here that I want to come to, a very good practical point. Practically, some departments don't know which doctors are coming, when doctors are coming, etc. So we have got a tool that can support with that. We've got a dashboard, and your outreach advisors, the team that I mentioned earlier, can support with that as well. So that's, and the recipe for cultural induction question, again, part of the standardised induction to support that. So I think we are there now. Sorry I missed those earlier, but thank you again, and we'll hang around for a bit if there are any questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, Jen.